Officer David Miller never imagined a Tuesday afternoon patrol would shatter the meticulously ordered world he shared with his partner. Rex, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a coat the color of sable and eyes like chips of amber, was more than a dog. He was an extension of Miller's own senses, his courage, his very will. They were a single unit, forged in the relentless heat of K-9 Academy, and tempered by 3 years of navigating the city's darkest corners. The snap of the lead had been so mundane, so utterly unremarkable. A frayed stitch, a moment of metal fatigue. Rex had been tracking a scent near the edge of Northwood Park, his body a taut line of focused energy, and then he was simply gone. The broken clasp lay glinting on the pavement, a tiny, silver failure that had severed their connection. Miller had called his name, the single sharp syllable that always brought the dog's head whipping around, ears pricked, ready for the next command. But this time, there was only the rustle of leaves in the sprawling urban forest and the distant hum of traffic. The silence was wrong. It was a deep, profound void where Rex's presence should have been. A trained police dog doesn't just run off. Not Rex. His discipline was legendary within the department, his focus absolute. A squirrel, a stray cat, even the tantalizing scent of a thrown frisbee, none of it could break his concentration on a task. For him to vanish without a sound, without a backward glance, meant something had gone terribly wrong. Miller's initial assumption, the one he clung to with professional desperation, was that Rex was disoriented, perhaps injured from a fall in the dense undergrowth. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, a colder, more unsettling possibility began to creep in. Rex's silence wasn't the silence of a lost animal, it was the focused silence of a dog on a mission. The first civilian call came in 47 minutes later, painting a confusing picture. A large, aggressive-looking German shepherd was seen near the park's main playground. It was pacing, the caller said, circling the area like a shark. Miller's heart seized. Aggressive. Not Rex. Never. He was intimidating by design, a powerful deterrent, but his temperament was rock solid. He was trained to engage on command, and only on command. Miller raced toward the location, his mind a frantic slideshow of worst-case scenarios: Rex, injured and lashing out in pain; Rex, cornered by scared civilians; a tragedy waiting to happen. He couldn't have known, as he sped through the city streets, siren off to avoid spooking the dog further, that Rex wasn't running away from his duty. He was running toward a duty far older and more profound than any command Miller had ever given him. What he was about to find in the deepening twilight of Northwood Park would unravel everything he thought he knew about training, about instinct, and about the invisible, unbreakable bonds that connect all living things. This was no longer a search for a lost police asset. It was a rescue mission, but the roles had been stunningly, inexplicably reversed. And if you've ever felt that deep, silent understanding with an animal, that sense that they know things we can't, then you'll want to see how this story unfolds. Stay with me, because what happened next left an entire city speechless. The park entrance was already a chaotic tableau of flashing blue and red lights that painted the evening sky in nervous strokes of color. Miller pulled his cruiser to a sharp halt, the familiar scene doing little to calm the frantic drumming in his chest. Uniformed officers had established a loose perimeter, their presence a mixture of caution and curiosity. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement, phones held up to capture the unfolding drama. To them, this was a spectacle, a dangerous police dog on the loose. To Miller, it was like searching for a missing part of himself. He stepped out of the car, the cool evening air doing nothing to quell the heat of anxiety rising in his throat. He scanned the faces of the other officers, reading their body language. They were tense, their hands resting near their sidearms. They saw a potential threat. Miller saw his partner, lost and alone. "What's the situation?" he asked the first officer he saw, a young patrolman named Evans. "He's in there, sir," Evans said, gesturing vaguely toward the vast expanse of darkening green. We've had 3 sightings in the last hour, all around the playground area. One woman said he lunged at her, but her story keeps changing. Another guy said he just stood there, watching. He won't let anyone get close. Miller's jaw tightened. Lunged? It didn't sound like Rex. But an injured, frightened animal was unpredictable, even one with years of training. The park was enormous, over 300 acres of manicured lawns, dense thickets of woods, and a winding, sluggish river. As dusk began to bleed into the sky, the shadows grew longer, turning familiar shapes into menacing figures. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig, sounded like Rex. Miller grabbed his tactical vest and a spare leash from the trunk, his movements clipped and efficient, a mask of professionalism hiding the turmoil within. He knew Rex. He knew the cadence of his breathing, the soft padding of his paws on pavement, the low whine he made when he was close to a find. He had to believe that their bond was strong enough to cut through whatever fear or confusion had taken hold of the dog. He started walking the perimeter, his eyes sweeping the tree line. He called Rex's name, not the sharp command he used on duty, but the softer version he used at home, the one that meant food, or a scratch behind the ears, or a quiet moment of companionship. Rex? Come here, buddy. The only response was the chirping of crickets and the distant wail of a city siren. He felt the weight of 100 watching eyes. The onlookers, the other cops, the news van that had just pulled up. They were waiting for him to control his animal, to handle the situation. But the situation felt bigger than that, stranger. There was a piece of the puzzle missing, a crucial detail that explained Rex's bizarre behavior. He pushed deeper into the park, away from the relative safety of the lights and the crowd, his boots sinking into the damp earth. The scent of pine and wet soil filled the air. This was Rex's element, a world of a million smells, a million distractions. Yet the reports all placed him in one specific area. Near the playground. Why there? It was an open, exposed space. A lost dog would seek cover, a place to hide. Rex was doing the opposite. He was staying visible, but keeping his distance. It was a paradox, and it made the hair on Miller's arms stand on end. He was a sentinel, not a stray. He was guarding something. Miller began to systematically interview the witnesses Evans had pointed out to him. The first was a young man in athletic gear, who had been jogging when he saw Rex. He was just standing there, by the edge of the woods, the jogger said, his voice still shaky. Staring at the swings. I thought maybe he was waiting for his owner. But then I got a little closer, and he growled. It was low, you know. Like a warning. I backed off real slow, a warning. Not an attack. That was a critical distinction. Rex was trained to establish a boundary. Miller moved on to the woman who had made the initial frantic call, the one who claimed Rex had lunged. She was overwrought, her hands fluttering as she spoke. It was terrifying. It came out of nowhere, this huge, vicious dog. Its teeth were bared. I had to run. Miller listened patiently, but his internal lie detector was screaming. He asked her to show him exactly where it happened. She pointed to a spot 50 yards from where the jogger had seen Rex. When pressed for details, her story crumbled. The dog hadn't lunged, it had taken a single, sharp step forward and barked once when her own small dog started yapping. She had panicked and run. He wasn't being aggressive, he was controlling the space. He was keeping people away from the playground and the adjacent woods. The third witness, an elderly man, who had been sitting on a bench reading, provided the most telling piece of information. I've been watching him for the better part of an hour, the man said, his voice calm and observant. He's not lost. Or if he is, he's not acting like it. He walks a pattern. From that big oak tree, over to the edge of the woods, then back. Always facing out, away from the trees. Always watching. He's working. That's a dog with a job to do. Miller felt a chill despite the mild evening air. A job to do. The words resonated with a terrifying clarity. Rex's programming was absolute. When he was given a task, he completed it. But who had given him a task? Miller hadn't. Unless he had found one himself. Miller thanked the man and walked toward the playground. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, their chains creaking a mournful rhythm. The merry-go-round was still, the plastic slides gleaming under the security lights that were just beginning to flicker on. It was an ordinary place, a place of laughter and children's games. But now it felt charged with a heavy, unseen tension. From his new vantage point, Miller could see the area more clearly. The playground was bordered on one side by a manicured lawn and on the other by a dense, almost impenetrable thicket of trees and thorny bushes. The old man was right. It was a perfect place to guard. You could see any approach from the open field, and your back was protected by the woods. Miller raised his binoculars, scanning the dark edge of the forest. And then he saw him. For a split second, a shadow detached itself from other shadows. It was Rex. He stood just inside the tree line, perfectly still, a living statue of canine focus. His head was low, his body coiled. He wasn't looking at Miller. He was looking past him, at the perimeter, at the flashing lights, at the world. And his posture was unmistakable. It was the exact stance he took when guarding a piece of evidence, or standing over a downed suspect. It was a stance that said, "This is mine to protect. Do not cross this line." Miller lowered the binoculars, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate beat against his ribs. The fear for his dog's safety was now eclipsed by a much larger, more terrifying question. What was Rex protecting in those woods? Just as the chilling realization began to crystallize in Miller's mind, a new sound cut through the tense quiet of the park, a woman's cry, sharp with panic. "Leo! My baby! Has anyone seen my little boy?" The voice sliced through Miller, bypassing the cop and hitting the man. He turned to see a young woman pushing through the police line, her face pale and streaked with tears. She was frantic, her eyes wide with a terror that Miller knew all too well. It was the primal fear of a parent who has lost a child. 2 officers intercepted her, trying to calm her down, but she was inconsolable. "He was just here," she sobbed, gesturing wildly toward the playground. "I turned my back for 1 second, just 1 second, to answer a text. And he was gone. He's only 3. His name is Leo." Miller felt the world tilt on its axis. The missing dog. The strange, protective behavior. The playground. And now, a missing 3-year-old boy. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just falling into place, they were slamming together with the force of a physical blow. He walked over to the woman, his voice low and steady, trying to project a calm he did not feel. I'm Officer Miller. When did you last see your son?" "Minutes ago," she choked out, her body trembling. "Maybe 5. 10 at the most. He loves the woods. He likes to hide. It's a game we play. But he always comes when I call." Always. She looked at Miller, her eyes pleading, desperate for reassurance. "He's nonverbal," she added, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He has autism. He won't answer you if you call his name. And he needs his medication. He has a severe allergy, he needs his EpiPen if he gets stung by a bee." The litany of vulnerabilities struck Miller, each one another twist of the knife. A nonverbal child, lost in a massive park as darkness fell, with a medical condition. And somewhere in that darkness was his dog, who was no longer just a missing canine, but the single, most important witness they had. The timeline was a perfect, terrible fit. Rex had disappeared from the other side of the park nearly 2 hours ago. It would have taken him time to travel this far. He could have stumbled upon the boy an hour ago, just as the first calls started coming in about a strange dog near the playground. Miller's mind raced, recontextualizing everything he had learned. Rex wasn't being aggressive, he was keeping strangers away from a vulnerable child. He wasn't pacing aimlessly, he was patrolling a perimeter. He hadn't abandoned his post with Miller, he had found a new one. The boy, Leo, had wandered into the woods, and Rex, guided by an instinct deeper than any training, had found him and stayed with him. He hadn't barked or led anyone to the spot because that wasn't his protocol. His training was to locate a subject and secure the scene, protecting them from any and all perceived threats. And right now, to Rex, the biggest threats were the growing crowd, the flashing lights, and the uniformed strangers slowly closing in. They weren't a search party. They were the enemy. Miller felt a wave of nausea. They had been handling this all wrong. Every shout, every siren, every step forward was making the situation worse, reinforcing Rex's belief that he and the boy were in danger. A rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, a low, guttural warning. The sky, which had been a placid canvas of twilight purples and oranges, was now bruised with dark, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and urgency. They were running out of time. The temperature was dropping, and a lost 3-year-old, especially if he was scared and sitting still, was dangerously susceptible to hypothermia. Miller turned to the commanding officer on scene, a sergeant named Corrigan. "We need to change tactics." Now Corrigan looked at him, skepticism etched on his face. "Miller, my priority is public safety. We have a potentially unpredictable animal cornering a missing kid. Protocol is to contain the dog." "No," Miller cut him off, his voice sharper than he intended. "Your protocol is going to get that child killed. That's not a potentially unpredictable animal, that is a highly trained police officer, who has found a missing person, and is protecting him. He thinks we are the threat. We need to pull everyone back. All of them. Turn off the lights, kill the sirens. We need to make this place quiet and safe, and let the dog just keep the kid." Corrigan countered, his frustration evident. "Sir, with all due respect, you're not thinking clearly. That's your dog. You're too close to this, that's exactly why I am thinking clearly." Miller shot back, stepping closer to the sergeant, his voice dropping to an intense, urgent whisper. "I trained him. I know how he thinks. His entire world is built on threat assessment. Right now, he sees a dozen armed strangers, a wall of flashing lights, and a crowd of screaming people. He's not cornering that boy, he's shielding him. If we rush in there, he will perceive it as an attack on the person he's protecting. He will do his job. He will defend him. And in that chaos, the boy could get hurt, or run deeper into the woods, or Rex could get shot by an officer who misreads the situation. Let me go in." Alone, the boy's mother, who had been listening to their exchange, rushed forward. "Please," she begged, looking at Sergeant Corrigan. "He's right. If that dog is with my Leo, please let him try." Corrigan stared at Miller, a long, hard assessment. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the unshakable conviction in Miller's eyes. He saw a handler, who knew his partner better than anyone. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "All right, Miller. Your way. But you get 5 minutes. If you're not out with the kid in 5, we are moving in." "Don't," Miller said, his voice flat and certain. "Just give me the space. I'll get them both." He turned and began to strip off his gear. His vest, his duty belt, his radio. He handed his sidearm to a stunned Evans. He needed to be completely non-threatening. This wasn't about authority or force. It was about trust. As the other officers began to quietly disperse the crowd and move the cruisers back, an almost surreal silence descended upon the park. The flashing lights died, leaving only the steady, pale glow of the park's own lamps. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the first fat drops of rain. Miller stood at the edge of the playground, alone, facing the dark woods. It was just him and his partner now, separated by a few hundred feet of darkness, and a profound misunderstanding. He took a deep breath, the rain cool on his face, and took the first step into the shadows. The transition from the manicured lawn of the playground to the untamed woods was immediate and stark. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Under the dense canopy of the trees, the remaining light vanished, plunging Miller into near-total darkness. The soft patter of rain on the leaves overhead became the only sound, a constant, rhythmic drumming that seemed to count down the precious seconds he had. He didn't use a flashlight. The sudden beam would be an intrusion, another threat in Rex's overloaded sensory world. He had to rely on his own night vision, on his memory of the park's layout, and on his faith in his partner. "Easy, buddy," he whispered into the darkness, his voice barely a breath. "It's just me. I'm coming, Rex." Easy now, he moved slowly, deliberately, his feet making soft, shuffling sounds in the undergrowth. He kept his hands visible, held slightly away from his body in a posture of non-aggression. This was a language Rex would understand. Every step was a negotiation. He was entering Rex's territory, the zone the dog had claimed and was now defending. He had to show he was not there to challenge him. He pushed aside a low-hanging branch, its wet leaves slapping against his cheek. He could feel the tension in the air, a palpable, electric hum of animal instinct. He knew Rex knew he was there. The dog would have heard him, smelled him, sensed his approach from the moment he stepped off the grass. The fact that Rex hadn't made a sound was a good sign. It meant he was recognized, but still being assessed. A warning bark would have meant stay back. Silence meant state your purpose. "I know you've got him, buddy," Miller murmured, his voice a low, continuous stream of reassurance. "I know you're doing your job. You're a good boy. Such a good boy. You found him. You kept him safe." He wasn't just talking to the dog. He was talking to himself, keeping his own rising panic at bay. The woods were disorienting, a maze of black trunks and tangled thorns. A flash of lightning momentarily illuminated the scene, casting the trees in skeletal white. In that brief, stark image, Miller saw him. Rex was about 30 feet ahead, standing at the mouth of a small, hollowed-out space beneath the roots of a massive, overturned oak tree. He was positioned squarely in the opening, a living barrier. His head was low, his ears pinned back, and a faint, almost inaudible rumble vibrated in his chest. It was the lowest-level warning a dog could give, the equivalent of a whispered threat. It wasn't for Miller. It was for the world behind him. Miller stopped, holding his ground. He sank to one knee, making himself smaller, less intimidating. He was now at eye level with his partner. "I see you, Rex," he said softly. "I see you. It's okay. The others are gone. It's just us now." He didn't move forward. The next move had to be Rex's. He had to be invited in. For a long minute, nothing happened. The rain fell harder, plastering Miller's hair to his forehead. The dog remained frozen, a statue of tense loyalty. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rex's tail gave a single, hesitant thump against the ground. It wasn't a wag of happiness, but a sign of recognition, of conflict. "I know you. But my duty is here." Miller understood. "I'm coming to help, buddy," he said, and began to slowly crawl forward on his hands and knees, the wet leaves and mud soaking through his pants. He was surrendering all authority, all dominance. He was just a man, approaching a dog, asking for trust. He closed the final few feet with painstaking slowness. The rumbling in Rex's chest subsided, replaced by a low whine of anxiety. He recognized his handler, his partner, but his protective duty was a powerful, overriding command. As Miller reached the opening, Rex shifted his body just enough to let him see what he had been guarding with his life. Curled in the dry space under the ancient roots was the small boy, Leo. He was awake, his wide, dark eyes staring up at Miller with a child's unfiltered curiosity. He was wrapped in a worn, faded superhero cape, his small fist clutching a fistful of Rex's thick fur just above his shoulder. The dog was a living furnace, a shield against the growing cold. Rex had curled his powerful body around the boy, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. One of the dog's paws rested gently on the child's back, a gesture of unmistakable comfort. The scene was so tender, so profoundly gentle, it stole the air from Miller's lungs. This wasn't a dog cornering a child. This was a guardian watching over his charge. The boy wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He looked calm, safe. He reached out a small, chubby hand and patted Rex's nose. The formidable police dog, the animal trained to chase down and subdue violent criminals, responded by licking the boy's hand with a soft, pink tongue. Miller felt a hot sting behind his eyes. In all his years of service, in all the horrific and heroic things he had witnessed, he had never seen anything like this. This was loyalty beyond training, an empathy that transcended species. Rex had understood the child's vulnerability, his fear, his need for warmth and comfort, and had provided it without hesitation. "Oh, Rex," Miller breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "What did you do, buddy?" Rex looked at him, his amber eyes seeming to hold a universe of understanding. "I did my job." Miller slowly extended a hand, not toward the boy, but toward Rex. He let the dog sniff his fingers, re-establishing their connection. Rex leaned into the touch, a long, shuddering sigh escaping his body. The tension that had held him rigid for hours finally began to drain away. He had held the line. He had kept the boy safe. Now, his partner was here. Reinforcements had arrived. Miller turned his attention to Leo, his voice soft and gentle. "Hey there, little man. You've had quite an adventure, haven't you?" The boy just watched him, his expression placid. He showed no fear, only a quiet acceptance of the situation. To him, this big, warm dog and the dark, cozy den were his entire world. Miller knew he couldn't just scoop him up. He had to make Rex understand that he was transferring custody of the boy, that this was a friendly handover. "Okay, Rex," he said, using his calm, command tone. "Watch him. Good boy. I am going to get him now. You stay." He slowly, carefully, reached for the child. Rex watched his every move, his head cocked, but he made no move to intervene. He trusted Miller. Miller gently gathered the small, warm body into his arms. The boy was surprisingly light. He smelled of rain, dog, and damp earth. As Miller lifted him, Leo's grip on Rex's fur finally loosened. The transfer was complete. "Let's go home, kid," Miller whispered, holding the boy close to his chest. He backed out of the hollow, and Rex followed, pressing close against his leg, once again his partner, his shadow. As Miller emerged from the tree line, a collective gasp went through the assembled officers, who had been waiting in tense silence. The image was surreal, the big, tough K9 handler, covered in mud, holding a small child in a superhero cape, with the dangerous dog trotting calmly at his side, looking up at him with utter devotion. The scene was lit by the distant, soft glow of the park lights, the rain falling around them like a silver curtain. It was quiet, reverent. Sarah, Leo's mother, broke the spell. She let out a choked cry and ran forward, her arms outstretched. "My baby. Oh, my Leo." Miller knelt and gently placed the boy into his mother's arms. She hugged him fiercely, her sobs of relief echoing in the quiet park. Leo, nestled against his mother, looked over her shoulder and pointed a small finger at Rex, a tiny, happy sound escaping his lips. It was the first sound anyone had heard him make. Rex responded with a soft woof and a thump of his tail. He sat patiently by Miller's side, his work done, his posture relaxed for the first time in hours. Paramedics rushed forward, wrapping Leo in a warm blanket, and beginning their assessment. He was cold and a little dehydrated, but otherwise perfectly unharmed. There wasn't a scratch on him. Sergeant Corrigan approached Miller, his face a mask of awe and contrition. "Miller. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Miller replied, his hand resting on Rex's head, scratching the familiar spot behind his ears. "Just trust your officers." Human and canine, the onlookers, who had been held back, were now murmuring amongst themselves, their phones once again raised, but this time not to capture a threat, but to document a miracle. The story was changing in real time, from a dangerous animal alert to an incredible tale of heroism. The fear in their faces was replaced by wonder. They weren't looking at a police dog anymore. They were looking at a hero. Miller led a weary Rex toward his cruiser. The dog was limping slightly, a small cut visible on his front paw, likely from the broken lead or his initial trek through the woods. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The sustained vigilance had taken its toll. Miller opened the rear door, and Rex hopped into his kennel without a command, curling up with a deep, contented sigh. His duty was over. Miller stood for a moment, the rain washing the mud from his face, and watched as Sarah held her son, whispering his name over and over, her face buried in his hair. She looked up and met Miller's eyes across the rain-swept lawn. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, her expression filled with a gratitude so profound it needed no words. It was a gratitude that extended to him, and to the four-legged partner, who had become her son's silent, furry guardian angel. In that moment, the exhaustion hit Miller like a physical blow. The adrenaline drained away, leaving a deep, bone-weary ache. But it was overshadowed by an immense, swelling sense of pride. Pride in his partner, in their bond, and in the incredible, mysterious heart of an animal. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Rex and Leo became a local legend. The news channels, which had arrived expecting a tense standoff, instead broadcast a heartwarming tale of interspecies heroism. Rex was no longer just K9 Officer Rex, he was Rex the Protector, a citywide celebrity. The department was flooded with letters, emails, and donations for the K9 unit. School children drew pictures of a German Shepherd with a superhero cape, standing guard over a small boy. Rex, for his part, was entirely unimpressed by the fame. He recovered from his minor injuries and his exhaustion, and was cleared for duty a week later. To him, nothing had changed. He was still Miller's partner, still ready for the next command, the next mission. But for Miller, everything had changed. He looked at his partner differently. The bond he had always cherished as a professional tool, a product of rigorous training and shared experience, now felt like something sacred. He had always respected Rex's intelligence and skill, but now he understood his soul. He had witnessed an act of pure, unprompted compassion that defied every parameter of their training manuals. Rex hadn't been commanded to find that boy. He hadn't been ordered to protect him. He had chosen to. He had seen a small, helpless creature in distress and had appointed himself its guardian. He had used his training not because he was told to, but because it was the best way he knew how to help. Miller often thought about that night in the park. He remembered the feeling of crawling through the mud, stripping himself of all authority, and putting his absolute faith in his partner. It had been a lesson in humility, in trust, in a form of communication that went deeper than words. It had made him a better handler, and a better man. He and Rex visited Leo, and his mother a few times. The boy, who was shy and withdrawn around most strangers, would light up whenever he saw the big German Shepherd. He would bury his face in Rex's fur, and Rex would sit as still as a statue, soaking in the affection, a low rumble of contentment in his chest. A silent understanding passed between the boy who couldn't speak and the dog who had no words. What began as a crisis a frantic search for a lost partner, had become a profound revelation. It was a stark reminder that beneath the uniform, the training, and the titles, there are instincts that connect us all, the instinct to protect the vulnerable, to offer comfort in the face of fear, to stand guard in the darkness. Rex, the lost police dog, had reminded an entire city that the greatest acts of courage are often silent, and the most powerful heroes are sometimes the ones who walk on four paws. The autumn leaves turned to gold and crimson, carpeting the paths of Northwood Park. Life in the city returned to its normal rhythm, but for those who had been there that rainy night, the memory remained vivid, a small, warm light against the ordinary. Officer Miller and Rex were back on patrol, a familiar sight in their black and white cruiser. Yet, the way Miller looked at his partner had fundamentally shifted. He no longer saw just a highly skilled tool of law enforcement. He saw a being of profound empathy, a silent warrior whose moral compass was guided by an instinct more true than any human law. He would watch Rex in the rearview mirror, the dog's noble head silhouetted against the passing city lights, and a quiet sense of awe would wash over him. He had been entrusted with the partnership of a creature whose capacity for loyalty and goodness seemed boundless. He had learned that night that their connection wasn't a one-way street of command and obedience. It was a shared duty, a silent pact to watch over each other, and to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. The experience had softened the hard edges that years on the force had given him. It had rekindled a part of him he thought was long dormant, a belief in simple, uncomplicated goodness. He found himself more patient, more observant, more willing to listen to the quiet truths that lay beneath the surface of things. Rex, in his own way, seemed changed too. He was still the focused, disciplined officer he had always been, but there was a new depth in his gaze, a quiet confidence that went beyond his training. He had faced a challenge outside the scope of his duties, and had not been found wanting. He had proven himself, not just to his handler, but to his own ancient code of honor. The final, peaceful image is not one of dramatic rescue, but of a quiet evening weeks later. Miller is sitting on his back porch, the day's work done. Rex is lying at his feet, his head resting on Miller's boot. The bond between them is a comfortable, palpable silence. Miller reaches down, his hand stroking the dog's powerful neck, and Rex leans into the touch with a soft sigh. What began as a handler's worst nightmare became his greatest lesson. Sometimes, the partners we rely on have a wisdom all their own, a silent understanding of what truly matters. They remind us that the most important commands are not spoken, but are felt in the heart: protect the innocent, comfort the afraid, stay with them until help arrives. And if you've ever looked into the eyes of an animal and seen not just a pet, but a friend, a guardian, a soul, then you know the truth that Officer Miller learned that night. True loyalty doesn't need a command. It just needs a reason. Thank you for sharing this journey with us.